Okay, everyone, welcome to the Theology and Ethics podcast of the Kirkwood Center. My name's Anthony Costello. I'm joined today by Lenny Esposito and Dr. Jacob Daniel. And today on the podcast, we're going to be looking at a couple of criticisms that Randal Rauser, who's a fairly well-known Christian theologian up in Canada, people in the apologetics world will certainly know some of Randal's work. Some criticisms that Randal's made recently about William Lane Craig. And these criticisms relate to Craig's interaction with Ravi Zacharias right before Ravi Zacharias died, or shortly before he died. And that a letter that Craig recently received from Steve, Lenny, is it Bowman or Bauman?
Bauman.
Bauman, the banjo
Baughman.
Is his moniker that he goes by, who was, an atheist. So what would you call it? Social media figure who broke a lot of the story about Ravi Zacharias's so many sins and iniquities. For those who are unfamiliar with that, which probably be the minority in this audience, but Ravi Zacharias, over time it came out that he was involved in various kinds of sexual harassment cases and maybe even abuse cases, and of course there were the falsified or exaggerated academic credentials. I mean, the primary instances were the sexual ones that apparently played out over a long period of time and that were covered up by Zacharias and possibly by those who were in his inner circle. So anyways, the background to Randal Rauser's criticisms of William Lane Craig, which we think need to be responded to themselves, is that Steve Bauman wrote a letter to William Lane Craig recently, just earlier this year, talking about a dinner that he had with William Lane Craig and his wife Jan 20 years ago. It was a very friendly dinner that they had, where even though Bauman still walked away an atheist, he was impressed not only by Craig's intellectual arguments in defense of the Christian faith, but by the kindness of his wife, Jan Craig, who just listened intently to Bauman, and so he gave him a hug after the dinner was over, and that meant a lot to him. But in this letter, which we'll link to, Craig relates back to Bauman a story about a dinner that he had, which I think would have been in or around 2017, shortly before Ravi Zacharias died. Was it 2017? I think so. Where Zacharias was complaining to Craig, and I think his wife Jan as well, and Ravi Zacharias' wife was at this dinner as well. But Zacharias was complaining to Craig about Steve Bauman and his attacks on Zacharias, saying that Bauman was trying to tear Zacharias down. And then he went on to say to Craig that Bauman was coming for Craig next. Okay. So flash forward to this May 2025 letter where Craig is responding to Bauman, talking about the dinner that Bauman had 20 years ago with with William Lane Craig and his wife Jan. And Craig relates this story in this letter back to Bauman, saying that he was surprised that the attack never came by Bauman. Now, Randal's criticism, and we'll play this here. Randal's criticism, in a nutshell, is that Craig fails to mention the reason for why he no longer believes Ravi Zacharias' story, or why he was surprised that the attack never came. And that the reason he gives in the letter is because he thinks Bauman is still open to the Christian faith. But Rauser thinks Craig should have given the reason. Craig should have given the reason that now I know the story was untrue because I've come to know that Ravi Zacharias was a habitual liar, a manipulator, and a deceiver. And Rauser thinks in failing to mention that Craig is morally culpable in some way. Okay. So that's the background of this. And Randal has put out 2 videos. We're going to watch some clips from video 1, which is entitled Shocking, William Lane Craig Believed Ravi Zacharias. And then we'll go into video 2, which is entitled Bill Craig's Indefensible Trust of Ravi Zacharias Explained Further. Anything you guys want to add to that? I hope it explained it. It's a little bit tricky to explain.
And all of this was predicated on a point that basically Craig published Bauman's letter on reasonable faith in this exchange. This is kind of what even prompted Randal Rauser to start the whole thing. It was reasonable faith's publication of this, the fact that there was a secondary exchange in this letter that Bauman wrote back to the Craigs saying how after 20 years, I still have this memory and it was very impressive to me. And so all of the interpretation that Rauser is providing begins with the letter that Craig himself published on his own site. And then correspondingly, then Randal Rauser, I believe, contact Bauman separately offline to ask him some of these things. He seems to make that claim that he had an offline conversation with him as well. Unfortunately, he didn't ever have an offline conversation with William Lane Craig that I can hear. Yeah. And that's one of the first things I think that we need to know.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point because Rauser is one who I think he sees himself as trying to hold the apologetics community accountable. He sort of is on the outside of that. I understand. And look, we've been critical on this channel of Christian apologetics as well. Not good Christian apologetics, but we're Randal, I think, sees himself as, again, sort of somebody who is trying to provide a voice of like reasonable critique of the guild, so to say. And that's probably not a bad thing. I mean, it's not a bad thing to do that. But I think what we're going to see here is that he's really stretching it. I think he's stretching it a bit in these 2 criticisms of Craig. Not that we defend Craig on every single issue, although he has been a teacher to some of us, of course. But I think we want to point out that in this case, I don't think Randal is really helping much at all. So we're going to go to the first clip is at 5:19. We're going to fast forward here a little bit. Now, this is after in the May 2025 response to Bauman, Craig says that the reason he now realized that Bauman's attack never came was because he thinks Bauman is still open to the Christian faith.
To me, that William Lane Craig has not yet come to terms with the fact that one of the central Christian apologists was a serial sexual predator and habitual liar who lived a double life. And that his whole Christian apologetics presentation appears to have been, so far as I can see, a facade in order to promote himself and to get into a position where he used his ministry to exploit other people for his own sexual gratification. And there's just no awareness of that in Craig's recollection of this anecdote shortly before Ravi Zacharias died. And it's shocking to have somebody like Craig, who, as intelligent as he is, appears to be so utterly fatuous in recalling this exchange that he still thinks Ravi Zacharias is somehow a reliable narrator about his interactions with Steve Bothman. And the total lack of awareness that Steve Bothman was doing his civic duty in calling out this sexual predator instead thinking somehow he was on some tirade just to attack Christian apologists. This is a devastating indictment, I think, of William Lane Craig. And to the extent that these attitudes still persist among the evangelical industrial complex, evangelical apologetic industrial complex, this is a broader indictment of that subculture.
Okay, so it's a pretty strong criticism there, not just of Craig, but of what Randal calls the evangelical apologetics complex. He says that it's a devastating indictment of William Lane Craig. He says it's shocking, and he calls Craig vacuous. And again, this is all based on what I think is an absence of evidence. It's because Craig fails to mention something in this letter response to Bachman.
I think one of the things that comes to light through this response is that there are still three kinds of people in the apologetics world. For some, the book is closed. For some, it's still open. And a lot of people are confused as to what really went about with the Ravi Zacharias case. And here, I think he's speaking from this book is closed. There's a response that is needed in terms of apologists at that level, including William Lane Craig. But I think there are a lot of missing factors here. One of which is that I think William Lane Craig, his focus with Bowman is more in terms of the Christian outreach and his response to what's going about in the apologetics world. Whereas where Rauser is coming from is that he is latching on to the fact that why is William Lane Craig ignoring the fact that this has went about with Ravi Zacharias. So at the end of the day, I think ultimately, this is going to be cleared if William Lane Craig responds to Rauser and gives, there's no other way to come to it as a final response. But as you say, I do think that he's latching on to something that is not necessarily needed to accuse him of something that he's not including in his response in the letter.
Part of the problem with Rauser is there's so much that he presumes in this whole situation. So let's take this statement that he made. First of all, he presumes to understand Ravi Zacharias as putting on a facade, using his entire ministry as a facade or as a tool, as a weapon, in order to position himself in such a way that he would be able to take advantage of women. That's basically what he said in that clip. And that the fact that Bill Craig hasn't come to terms with that aspect of Zacharias that put on a facade and basically play acted the role of apologist in order to be a sexual predator shows a terrible regard upon Craig. This is not necessarily true. It may be the fact, I don't think it's disputed in any way, shape, or form that Zacharias did prey on women sexually. I don't think that that's under dispute. That doesn't mean that his motives for either initially becoming an apologist or continuing in the ministry, that those motives were simply self-serving. It may be that his cover-up would be self-serving, which would be natural. But the motives may necessarily hold true, and he may just be a deeply flawed, deeply convicted individual who was struggling with a sin that he couldn't overcome the way an addict would or anything else. We know Martin Luther, for example.
Martin Luther King Jr. or Martin Luther?
Martin Luther, the Protestant reformer, was deeply anti-Semitic. But that doesn't mean that we discount all of his talk about, grace and forgiveness because see
his motivation for what he did as a reformer grounded solely in his sinful disposition against Jews. Exactly.
People are more complex than this, and there should be a little bit more humility that Rauser is broaching than this. And then you have to take it then a step further and saying the fact that Craig didn't even recognize this. Oh, well, see, that's
That's a huge jump.
Rauser's bias, first of all, in assuming that Craig doesn't hold Zacharias accountable. And when we get into part 2, because in part 2 he gives basically 2 options, right? In the second video, he backs up just a little bit from this stance and says there are 2 possible ways to interpret Craig. That's his claim. Yeah. And when we get into that, we'll show that. I think that there are more than 2 possible ways. I think he's just missing the third way. But he's not, he is almost committing the sin he's accusing Craig of against Craig himself in saying, why aren't you seeing this? Why, you seem to have an assumption, a presupposition about this individual that you're continuing to carry on, and you can't see the forest for the trees. Well, isn't this what we're complaining about in Rauser's response?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's pretty sort of heavy allegations, again, that he's making. He's calling, he says it's profoundly disturbing. He says that Craig's lack of giving the reason. Now we know that Ravi Zacharias was a habitual liar. That seems to be what Rauser demands, that Craig or anybody else who is like in a similar position to Craig has to say, I guess, anytime they mention Ravi Zacharias, right? You have to say something,
publicly,
make a qualifying statement that now we know. Now, the reason I know, Steve Bauman, why your attack never came is because now we all know, and I know as well, that Ravi Zacharias was this habitual liar, manipulator, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, Randal seems to be basing that only on the fact that it's not mentioned in this letter. But in both videos, what I noticed that Randal fails to mention is the 2021, there was a 2021 Facebook post that William Lane Craig put up, and we can link, there's a Julie Roy's article mentioning it, where Craig and several other apologists, Mike Licona, Gary Habermas, Paul Copon, and others, are calling for accountability for the RZIM board, right? And then in November of 2022, a letter went out that was, I think, authored by Mike Licona, but signed by Craig, Copon, and others, clearly trying to hold the RZIM board accountable, sort of as a group of apologists, because there's no, official apologetics body that holds anybody accountable who is considered an apologist. So it seems to me there's counter evidence that Craig does recognize that Zacharias was a habitual liar and a manipulator, and that when this letter from Bauman comes in 2025, it's not that Craig is still ignorant or vacuous of how deceitful or manipulative or how much of a liar Zacharias was. I think he does know that. He just doesn't mention it in this letter.
It becomes
mention it in this particular letter.
Yeah, he becomes inside baseball, right? When you're talking to somebody who already understands the broad outlines of the debate, you don't have to rehash those again, because remember, this was a personal correspondence.
He's already said that in several other places. He's already admitted and recognized publicly in several other places. Ravi Zacharias was bad. He lied to us. He manipulated and deceived us. Does he have to say that every single instance he writes or mentions Ravi Zacharias?
And as you said, Lenny, this is a personal response to an impact that Bauman had in the meeting, right? And a response, I think I see William Lane Craig and the way he writes to him with regards to his still appeal to Christianity. I think that's the response so that he may have continued communication an engagement. As apologists, we understand that, right? Because Ravi is not the focus of this thing, though Ravi did raise that concern against Bauman, that he would come after William Lane Craig. But I think this response has to be seen. The primary issue was that he's latching on to something as an apologist would, that Bauman would respond to the Christian faith.
Yeah, I think it's at the 4-minute mark where he specifically says, if you're going to recall an anecdote about Ravi Zacharias, you're going to preface it with, well, of course, we now know the guy was a fabulous habitual. So if we can even play that at the 4-minute mark.
That's at the 4-minute mark.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, this is, I guess, how Randal believes Christian apologists must, I guess, in every instance, refer to Ravi Zacharias when they talk about him. Here's the 4-minute mark.
If you're going to recall an anecdote about Ravi Zacharias, you're going to preface this with, well, of course, we now know that the guy was a fabulous habitual liar and a sexual predator, and yet there's nothing of that.
So there it is. It's sort of an accusation based on a absence of evidence.
Yeah, he goes on to say, well, you would never know from what William Lane Craig says here that there is any scandal associated with Ravi Zacharias at all. I mean, that's the very next line he says.
But what is that saying? It's saying because Craig doesn't say this, doesn't say X, he must believe Y.
Yes.
I think that's the logical, the illogic here, or the logical leap that Randal's making. He's saying, because Craig fails to give these qualifying statements about Zacharias in this one particular instance, then he must still believe, or have believed all the way up till now, that what Ravi Zacharias told him at that dinner was true. But that doesn't follow. It doesn't follow that just because Craig doesn't mention here, now we all know that Ravi Zacharias is a fabulous and a habitual liar. It doesn't follow that he still believes, all the way up to the Steve Bauman letter, that what Ravi Zacharias told him at that dinner before Ravi died was true.
Right. And of course, two things. If you're hearing that and reflectively looking back, the first thing that you would think of is, well, these charges that Bauman was, quote unquote, going after Zacharias, they were actually true charges. And so one of the reasons why Bauman didn't come after me is because I don't have those issues in my ministry that he had in his. I'm not falling to that. So the second thing is, like, Craig probably never even thought about Bauman's or the threat that Zacharias told him against Bauman. That was just he braced for it for maybe a day, a week, a couple of months possibly, and it fades from your consciousness as you're continuing on in ministry. And now that Bauman writes him again, he says, "Oh yeah, I remember back then." So it's not like it's something that he was, dwelling upon or saying, "Oh, there was no scandal or no reason to worry because I thought." It just doesn't follow. It just doesn't make sense.
But there's another angle to it, maybe a factor to be considered, is that when Ravi did mention this to William Lane Craig, that he would come after him, would it be the same threat we're talking about, or are we talking about some different kind of threats that would come against? Because Ravi's threat is basically the academic, the whole PR thing that was going about, the claims that's being made about him speaking in different universities and the degrees that he had and everything. I don't think William Lane Craig has to worry about any of those, because he's been in a different category altogether when it comes to universities inviting him and the degrees that he had, 2 or 3 PhDs. So I really want to also know that when that was said, what William Lane Craig would have seen that as a threat.
I think he would have taken.
Level.
I think he would have just taken it as a general. Okay, there's going to be some kind of slanderous charge brought against the ministry. I don't know what that is. I mean, that would be just for the sake of animus. So what Craig is actually doing in his response to Bauman is he's saying, I would, given the information that Zacharias said, I was initially going to be trepidatious about you, thinking that you had an animus against me and an axe to grind. But now I understand that Zacharias was lying. He doesn't say it.
I don't think you could interpret,
but you can infer it. You
Yeah,
can
you
infer
could
it.
interpret that way.
I
given what you
understand
know.
it that Zacharias was trying to bolster his own position, and that you weren't coming after him because of animus. You were coming after him because there were real problems.
Yeah, I mean, Zacharias was telling that story because he was probably already trying, because he was trying to get others around him on his side, and to see these things as unwarranted attacks, right? That's
Right.
what you do
Right.
when you're when you know you're guilty and you need to trying to rally the troops around you in spite of the truth. We get that. But okay, let's flash forward to the very end of this video, and then we'll do a little bit on the second video. So this is at the 7:03 mark. Randall's going to sort of finish up here again by sort of a pretty heavy-handed indictment of Craig's vacuousness, at least in Randall's words.
Zacharias was a liar. Rabbi Zacharias was a manipulator. Rabbi Zacharias was a sexual predator. And if you're going to recall any anecdotes about this individual, they need to be prefaced by that. They need to be prefaced by the statement that his word is worthless. It's worth nothing. And that any claims he's going to make about other people, you don't take them with a grain of salt. You take them with a salt quarry worth of salt. There's none of that awareness here. And I find that to be profoundly disappointing and disturbing.
Okay, so there he says it very clearly. Basically says, at any time you mention Ravi Zacharias, especially, I guess, if you're a Christian philosopher apologist, you have to preface it with the litany of his sins, right? Otherwise, if you don't, it's profoundly disturbing, right? And it impugns your character. I don't know that really follows. I mean, I
don't know that we do that with anything else.
Especially because we know that prior to this May 2025 letter, Craig has, on 2 and probably several more occasions that we're unaware of, recognized and acknowledged all of Ravi's sins and manipulations. So anytime that you mention Volkswagen, you better note that it was Hitler who was the impetus for that vehicle. Anytime that you talk about, hypothermia studies, you have to note that most of the data we get were from Mengele's experiments on Jews in World War II. How does this follow in any other point of life where there are, again, throughout history, people who were deeply, deeply flawed. It doesn't mean, and it doesn't mean that we have to always poison the well and say every aspect of anything that we're talking about, even in a personal conversation, and especially in a personal conversation like the one that's been was happening between Craig and Bauman. It was again, I don't have to put the guardrails into a letter where you and I both understand that the character, the third party who was referencing both of us, was flawed. We both have seen that openly. We both know, they both know more than most in the public what his flaws were and where, those egregious acts happened to a better degree than was released to the general public. And when I talked with some of the guys who were on that committee who researched these things, they will say, yeah, it didn't all come out. And when we talk to the victims and things like that, there's more than even we let release, because it didn't serve any further purpose to drag the victims through more shame and things of that nature. So, I mean, let me show this quick, because this is a January 2021 Julie Roys. It's on the Roys report. article that states that William Lane Craig had posted a statement, right? A public statement expressing grief over Ravi Zacharias' documented sexual misconduct, calling on the board to own its complicity in the scandal involving its late founder and to initiate reforms. Got Mike, our good friend Mike Austin, on there, Gary Habermas, Mike LaCote, JP's on there, Hugh Ross, etc. And that seems to be one that was initiated by Craig himself. So, is Randal asking that you have to do something like this over and over again every time you mention Ravi Zacharias? Otherwise, you're morally culpable of what? Of not calling evil evil, of participating in some way in evil. I don't know.
Well, one of the things that I noted in the clip that we listened to is at the 6:51 mark, where he uses, I think we mentioned it before, used the phrase evangelical apologetics industrial complex. Now, I've become highly sensitive to whenever anybody attaches the word industrial complex as a suffix to anything, because personally, that has an application, whereas the military industrial complex, there truly was an industry, right? There was a interrelational industry that helped fund and build military apparatus, and that industry profited from the upbuilding of military arms, such as it were. But now, it's, if you simply want to poison the well, what you do is you throw industrial context as a suffix to any kind of prefix that you want to besmirch. And that's what he does. Evangelical apologetic industrial complex. Yeah. Anyone who's been an apologist for any length of time would actually kind of laugh at this, because first of all, nobody is getting rich in apologetics. It's just, it is not.
That is the oldest, like, canard.
It
like,
is not the industry that you get wealthy. It's so much easier to bamboozle people by selling off, children, orphans in Africa or something.
Well, I mean, Craig has been charged with that. I'm like, you think like somebody like Craig, who could have probably gotten a position at some kind of higher ranking university than the ones he's worked at, but he's worked at the ones he has because he's committed to his, he's got his Christian philosophical and theological commitments. He could have even earned more money probably than he did going out on the road and doing the debates and all that stuff. I mean, it's like the idea that brought
right.
And I think scads of wealth or something,
But I think we got to be self-critical as well, and just keep a watch in terms of as people who are in that sphere of apologetics. How do we conduct ourselves? And
absolutely.
One of the we have to be really aware that this is exactly what went about with RZIM, right?
Yeah.
The aspiration to centralize the events and things like that, and really lifting one person up and focusing on that person. And I think what we have seen since then, since the fall of RZIM, is the decentralization of apologetics, in the sense that people are doing their work. It's not concentrated on one organization and their capacity to bring everyone together and do things together. So we need to be aware of that as well, that we don't repeat it. At the same time, what you're saying, Lenny, is absolutely right. It's not some kind of industry, and if that happens, it won't flourish.
Well, in fact, one of the reasons why Lacona, and it was initiated really by Debbie Lacona's understanding of what was going on. She pulled on Mike. Again, the Laconas, the Craigs, the Zacharias, they're all greater metropolitan Atlanta area. So they're local to one another. And one of the things that Craig had said when they put together this kind of makeshift commission in order to investigate these things was Craig said, if this was normally something that would happen in a church ministry, then what you would do is you would look to the denomination, you would look to the church structure, somebody to whom they can be accountable. There is no such entity within the broader apologetics community. These parachurch organizations, unfortunately, or for however you want to understand them, function independently from church hierarchies, from any kind of denominational authority or undership. Now, this is one of the problems with Ravi Zacharias specifically, is he wasn't putting himself under church authority. Otherwise, we could have appealed possibly to the whatever church or denomination he held himself, but he didn't put himself under a church authority. So what Craig said was, we as some of the more prominent apologetics ministry, just because we have eyes on us, we decided that maybe we need to police this, and we'll check it out. I don't know that that step was appropriate. I think maybe what would have been more appropriate, beyond simply just getting 3 or 4 or 7, I think there were actually 7.
I got the letter pulled up right here.
Yeah, in the apologetics frame, I think what they should have done was maybe they would have pulled someone from the Southern Baptist Convention, within Southern Baptist leadership, someone within Calvary Chapel, possibly someone within Christian Missionary Alliance. If they would have pulled 3 or 4 or 5 denominational heads as well, I think it would have had a lot more gravitas to it.
Yeah.
But that's what there is no industrial complex, because they had to figure out, who do we go to? We don't even know.
I mean, I want to, so here's, I got on the screen here. This is the November 2022 statement that this panel of apologists, Craig, Mike Licona, Debbie Licona, as you meant, put out. So again, it's clearly not that Craig was naive all the way up until May 2025, believing that everything Ravi Zacharias had told him was true, et cetera, et cetera. I think that Randal has not shown that. We'll go to the second video where I think he still doesn't make the case. And in part why I think he doesn't make the case is he fails to, I don't know whether it's intentionally or unintended, that Randal doesn't mention either the 2021 Facebook post by Craig or this 2022 statement, which seemed to show that Craig is aware of those things. And then the only complaint would be on Randal's part would be, but you have to preface every time you mention person X with all of your reasons for not believing him. Okay. And I just don't know that is necessarily the case, that Craig, every time you mention Ravi Zacharias or somebody else like him, you have to preface that mention, whether it be written or in person, with, the entire litany of sins that you are aware of that made you to that led you to no longer believe that what he had told you was true.
That may not necessarily be the case for people who were closely associated with Ravi Zacharias, who were working with him and enabled in one sense, right? In their case, it may come up. William Lane Craig was, as I say, degree of distance, right? He was much further from the organization. He was not working with Ravi Zacharias. Association for sure, but at the same time, that's not the case with a lot of people who were within the organization,
right?
And
who we know.
Yes,
I mean, who we had contact with. And look, I'm always kind of ambivalent on Randal. Randal, I think, is trying to do something here that is important in general, in the holding accountable, especially people who are very much in the public eye as Christian apologists. And I think we've tried to do it. We've done that to some extent on this channel as well, especially with some of our recent podcasts with Bethel McGrew. So there's certainly a place for that. And we can appreciate Randal sort of being outside the box on this a little bit and looking in and trying to make some criticisms that obviously people were not doing when they needed to do it.
Yeah.
Or
they did it in a different way. than they should have.
as these things were actually transpiring. And let's get to the second video, because Randal does bring up the massage parlor stuff, which I think is something that wrongly got overlooked years ago. So let's pull up the second video and see what Randal has to say in his backup video to the first, which this one is entitled Bill Craig's Indefensible Trust of Ravi Zacharias.
Yeah, why don't you start at 336 actually?
All right, you guys are 336.
That
Okay.
yeah.
All right, here we go.
So when Craig says, now I know why Bachman never went after him, it's because of some new information Bachman has presented to Craig. And the new information in context is pretty clear. What Craig is referring to here is the fact that Bachman revealed to him that 20 years before he had this transformative encounter with Craig and Craig's wife, Jan. And he said, the fact that after so many years, you should reach out to me suggests you are still open to Christian belief. So that is his commentary on now I know why you didn't attack me, as Ravi Zacharias said. And that's the end of it. Now there are two.
All right, do you want to stop there?
Yeah, so he's commenting on the letter, and again, Craig did write, now I know why you didn't, after 20 years, that you didn't attack me. But again, Rauser assumes he puts into play the idea that because Bachman has presented new information, and that this encounter was transformative, which was probably new to Craig, but now he's going to try and interpret. This is the point where the rubber meets the road. Why did Craig say, "Oh, you're still open to the gospel. Oh, you didn't attack me"? And from this point forward, it becomes really important to say, because what Randal Rauser does is he limits it to simply one of two choices. And I think it's a false dichotomy, but we can go from this point.
Okay. All right, let's continue a little bit. And I got more to say in about a minute.
Two possible interpretations, however, of this. And I'll start off with the more charitable interpretation of what Craig is saying here. The more charitable interpretation would be that now that he has received Bachman's account of this very positive exchange that he had with Craig 20 years before, Craig now reflects upon Ravi Zacharias and believes he was in fact lying when he claimed that Bachman was going to go after Craig. That's the first interpretation. The perhaps less charitable interpretation is that Craig still believes that what Ravi Zacharias said was true, that Bachman was planning to go after him and that he told that to Zacharias, but that Bachman ultimately decided not to go after Craig because Craig had positively impacted him 20 years before in the conversation with Craig and his wife, Jan. Now, neither one of those is a good explanation. For one thing, both of them entail that Craig continued to believe Ravi Zacharias was telling the truth up until 2025, when he got this letter from Bachman. So there's now been on the public record for 4 to 5 years, depending on how you want to count things, extensive record of Ravi Zacharias being a habitual liar.
Okay, so there's the two. Randal thinks there's only two possible ways to interpret Craig's response here. And he says that both of them entail that Craig still believed Ravi Zacharias' story up until 2025. I don't see that.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, I don't think Bachman was even in Craig's. I mean, 2017 was the dinner where Zacharias had made this point to Craig. Maybe you're worried about that for 6 months. Maybe it comes up again in a board meeting over here. Have we had any? No, okay. But by 2022, when the Zacharias scandal blows open, I don't think Bachman is even in Craig's conscious sphere at all. I think the issues of Zacharias and RZIM are, but I don't think it's just now Bachman reaches out and says, oh, and Craig says, oh, well, now that I think back on it, of course you weren't coming to attack me. And now we know why, especially since Bauman had that great reciprocal relationship with Jan and things of that nature. But but you heard him say specifically that he believed Zacharias up until 2025. I don't see how you can make that case
based on this one little line, or lack of lack of saying something into this one letter, in this one response
right.
that is on the Reasonable Faith website and we'll link to. Yeah, I think he's reading in. It's a kind of eisegetical move here. And again, now it could be, and because Randal's going to go on to call William Lane Craig fatuous and naive at some point. Now because it could be, let's say, maybe he did continue to believe that this story that Zacharias told him was still true. Now, it could be there are other factors. Maybe Margie Zacharias backed the story up. And could be that maybe Craig is trying to protect Margie at this point. Because maybe we don't want to say that she was a habitual liar. Maybe she was somebody that was habitually lied to. I don't know. There could be all kinds of other things that went on at that dinner that might cause him to wisely refrain from saying certain things. But even if he did continue to believe Zacharias up to 2025, again, I don't know that makes him morally culpable just because he's sort of naive and believes people too much.
And also, we need to also give this, if you're going that way, that maybe Ravi and Margie believed in it. We don't know what communication they've had with Bauman, because I know Ravi met with him personally and talked to them. So I don't know how he interpreted what Bauman said about, something. So maybe Ravi believed in it. Maybe he was not lying about this particular matter. Or maybe Margie believed in this and they communicated that with William Lane Craig. So, just seeing Ravi in light of this particular concern that he raised against William Lane Craig, I think interpreting that as being conclusively a lie, I don't think we can give that as well fully. Maybe they believed in it, or the way they interpreted their meeting that they had with Bowen.
It's really hard to ascribe, and it's just as wrong to ascribe every statement of a bad actor as being false on its face. I mean, we can look at, for example, South Africa, and I know that this is a contentious issue right now. Look, apartheid was not necessarily anything good, right? Nobody would hold to apartheid as being a just form of government. At the same time, what we are seeing is that white Afrikaners who have lived in the land longer are being systematically dismantled right now. So you can be a racist and still say, hey, there are real threats out here, and those threats be real. Even though you're a racist and your motivation may be maligned for doing that, the things that you say may actually be true, and you have to balance that. And it becomes much more difficult to do that, especially if you don't have access to the other individual. Again, Bauman hadn't approached Craig for 20 years. And so when he did, Craig said, oh, you're not you aren't holding the animus against me that I had heard. And now we can kind of figure out why that's true. But it's for Randal to think that just because somebody is a bad actor, therefore everything of his must be held with a quarry of salt, is not necessarily the way that you can approach most claims.
He does respond. Somebody left a comment like that, and he does respond to it at the end. Not somebody lies about one thing doesn't mean they're lying about everything. He does respond to it. Let's move on, though, because we got just a couple more clips and want to wrap this up. Because, and again, here's Randal, again, levying some pretty heavy allegations against Craig's character, I think. So at the 6-minute mark.
Have zero credibility. So the fact that after all of this evidence about Ravi Zacharias, maintaining massage parlors, he was maintaining his own massage parlors where he would sexually groom and abuse women. He's keeping all that quiet and using money from our ZIM ministries or our Vim ministries as part of this. It is unbelievable. The fact that you would give any credibility to a person like that is, to my mind, deeply concerning and evidence that the individual who continued to believe Ravi Zacharias, even after so many years and so much evidence against him, was indeed fatuous or naive.
Okay, so there he says, once you find out that he's been doing all these things, you should not believe that anything you heard him say is true. Pretty much. And if you continue to believe that anything, now that obviously can't be the case with regards to Zacharias's public speaking and his sermons, because they were objectively true and pretty accurate presentations of the gospel. So you'd have to say, well, with regards to personal things, personal stories, you can't believe anything that the habitual liar is saying. So I guess that is Rauser's claim, is that once all this stuff comes out, you have to discount any personal conversations you've had with Ravi Zacharias. So I guess he does expect Craig and everybody else to say nothing we heard him say in private or in personal conversation. We can't believe any of it is true. So if you do, I guess I think the words he uses here are fatuous and naive. So again, I don't know. That seems to me a little bit.
And again, if you've ever been in this realm of ministry, those who do apologetics regularly are used to being attacked by atheists. It's a common tactic. It's so common. A very prominent apologist several years ago once asked me, it's like, I don't know if I can continue doing this because I don't have a skin thick enough to keep throwing off the barbs and the personal and the vindictiveness and the vileness and just how people come after you for being holding the gospel. It becomes really, really difficult. I remember with my own ministry where people would say things, you go, okay, fine. But then they start saying things about your family and your children, and they start disparaging them in ways, and it hurts. It becomes dangerous. And he asked, how can, I wish God would give me tougher skin. And my response was, no, pray that he doesn't, because it's that tenderness. It's that fatuousness and naivety, can I say?
Yeah,
that keeps us human. It's that thing that makes us not throw the baby out with the bathwater. And again, my concern is that Randal Rauser, if you believe Craig is now fatuous and naive, then do you have to preface everything you say about Craig with the fatuous and naive Craig? Are you going to play by these same rules? Are you going to say everything that Craig says cannot be trusted anymore because he's so naive he would believe anything? You better double check all of his sources, right? Is he going to do what he's promoting?
Criticizing Craig of doing, I think, yes. Yeah. Or not doing. Yeah, so okay. I mean, it is true. I mean, and Craig himself has been labeled so many different things and made fun of and mocked and so on and so forth, especially back in the day, 10, 15 years ago. It was routine for atheists to gang up on him and make all kinds of claims that he's in it for the money, all those kinds of ridiculous claims, that he's lies, this and that and the other thing. So yeah, some of these guys, especially guys who are more prominent, have been primed to believe that if somebody that they at the time still believe says that an atheist or a skeptic is coming for them, that might likely be the case because they've already had several experiences of the sort of people coming after them just because they are defending an orthodox historic Christian worldview, right? That would be nothing new, especially at the time of the new atheists, which was commonplace to mock Christian philosophers or theologians or apologists. Now, the one thing I did want to mention, because this is something that really infuriated me after I found out about the sex scandals and the academic credentials, was that possibly long before any of those things, came out, it was publicly known that Ravi Zacharias was in partnership with a friend, or maybe two friends, in massage parlors in and around Atlanta. Now, that's something that I think everybody had to have had known about. And right then and there, if I had known about that back in the day, I think I would have been much more reserved about my donations to RZIM. Okay, and then I only found about that way later. I'm like, that would have been something where there should have been yellow, if not red flags going up.
Yeah, the board is definitely accountable to that.
I mean, that was public knowledge. I mean, there's video of him standing out in front of these massage parlors cutting the ribbons at the grand opening ceremonies. So stuff like that, I mean, again, there have been huge failures here. I just think what we're trying to show is Randal's not making a good case for his criticism against Craig.
Should then have said, oh, well, then obviously, if he was a liar and if Zacharias was a liar and Bachman was telling the truth about him, why would he continue to believe up until 2025 this claim from Zacharias that Bachman was going after Craig?
Okay, so there he just says it again. And again, I don't think he's shown that Craig did still believe up to 2025. I just don't think he's shown that.
No, I don't think he was thinking of Bachman in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. And again, in both of these videos, Randal doesn't mention the public acknowledgement by Craig and others of all of Zacharias's sins that probably would count as counter evidence to this idea that he still believed Zacharias. It's probably the case he didn't believe him anymore. He just didn't write it in the letter. All right, last clip.
25, where Craig still have to believed Ravi Zacharias, and only to have begun to change his mind about Zacharias in either of the two ways that I described, when he got a letter from Steve Bachman presenting his take on a very positive exchange from 20 years ago. So what this person Very is doing is downplaying Craig's own fatuousness, his own willingness to continue to trust somebody who is obviously, by all the public evidence, a habitual liar and a predator and a fabulist. And that is itself shameful. And to my mind, I mean, there's a certain irony here that just because you've got a great intellect and you have a PhD in systematic theology and philosophical theology, I guess it doesn't make you a good judge of people's character. And it doesn't necessarily give you wisdom in how to identify when people are telling the truth and when you are being lied to or manipulated. And that's maybe the reality, but it's also deeply concerning, because apologetics is not just the matter of presenting abstract intellectual arguments. It's a matter of holistic credibility. And when people like Craig continue to believe a fabulous liar, predator like Ravi Zacharias about comments he made about Steve Bachman, even years after he's been fully discredited, that just goes to undercut your general credibility as an apologist for the Christian faith.
All right. I think that is a huge, huge leap. We've said it several times now, but just to emphasize this point. if you tend to be naive in believing people, people who turn out to be very good at deception, I don't see how that makes you morally guilty of something. Like Randal seems to be saying Craig is sort of morally guilty for being innocent, basically innocent as a dove, naive. I mean, yeah, it may be right that being a very good conceptual or abstract thinker and highly intelligent and well-read doesn't lead you to be a good judge of character. That may be the case. I think we know a lot of people like that. But does not being a good judge of character make you not credible when you do your apologetics, A, and B, somehow also morally guilty of something? I don't see that.
There's so much that the Bible itself talks about when you look at the outward appearance versus God looking at the heart. One of the biggest problems with both of these videos is Randal Rauser is approaching them as a Christian, criticizing other Christians. And what I see is the lack of charity that he. So I think when you look in the comments of that first video, one of the things that you see is over and over again, people are saying, Randal, I think you got it wrong. I think you're letting your emotions get the better of you. That's not how I read the exchange. And it was reinforced quite a bit. Whereas the majority of folks there are saying, you're not taking the kindest interpretation here. And he just seems to double down on the second one. He offers those two options without saying the third option is, oh, Steve, so glad to hear from you. Let me just relay an anecdote from what I heard that you could appreciate because, now I know how I was misled by Ravi in 2017, the way, through your work as when he was commenting upon you. And so that's just something that we share in common is this experience kind of thing. And it wasn't meant to be condemning on Bauman. It was just, hey, this is what happened. And, but I'm glad to hear from you now. And I'm glad to hear that you aren't someone who's just gunning for apologists point blank. You were actually doing the work that you felt that was important to do. So, I mean, you can take a much more charitable view toward Craig's comments. Again, they're talking inside baseball. Craig and Bauman don't have to rehash, especially in a personal letter, all these details. Mm-hmm. But I just worry that Rauser that's not the approach that we should be taking because many, many times you find out that it's not the case. And again, if this was that concerning, did Randal Rauser approach William Lane Craig and ask him, is this what you mean? Did I get it right? And that's the piece I don't see.
And also, I don't know if this mandates a response from Craig or not. But even if it doesn't, I think the Christian world would understand why this is the case, that he didn't want to give any space for further maybe discussions on Ravi Zacharias and what went about. Here, the focus was their experience, as you said, Lenny, during that dinner that Bauman had with Jen and Craig. And that was the focus, and latching on to that and having a further discussion on that with regards to what Christ is doing in perhaps Bauman's heart and mind.
Well, Craig won't have to respond to this one because we have. So we saved him him and Kevin Harris the trouble of picking up Randal's videos and wasting the time on responding to them. But I will say this: I think what Randal, what little I know about him, I've read some of his academic work, and I've watched a number of his videos and interactions on other channels. And again, I'm ambivalent. I like some of the things he says. Some of the other things I certainly would want to push back against. I think he's got this general concern of cover up. right? Cover up within the churches, within the apologetics community, within various Christian communities. And it's true. It's true. And I mean, nobody's denying cover-ups. The Ravi Zacharias, various pastoral cover-ups that, when they hit, they explode, right? And it hurts the church. It hurts everybody. It hurts everybody and everything. But, if you start, and, this like we've made some, think of like, I think Julie Roy's is sort of in a position like this too, where you're looking for cover up. You're looking to find people who, according to some standard that you created, are not doing enough to expose evil, right? And then you're attributing a sort of well, here, not more than just naivete. You're kind
malicious motive. Yeah,
a malicious motive. Like everybody is just always trying to cover up everything else, and so on and so forth. And I think that's a dangerous road to go down.
Yeah, I think this is exactly what we're seeing a symptom in culture too. Your silence makes you guilty.
Yeah.
About it because you're not saying something about it.
I mean, there's all kinds of things I could think about right now that I could try and expose, but part of it is just like once I mean, again, it's closeness to the issue as well. And you have to take into, I think, account a lot of other factors. I mean, I worry about, you want to expose evil, you want to expose bad behavior and heretical teaching, but at the same time, you're limited. You're limited at in what you think your relationship to the teacher or the teaching is, whether or not you're the one that needs to be responsible for that kind of exposure, and then everybody's got like other things going on, and Craig is like, how much work is that guy doing on any given day? Positive work, constructing, his next volume of theology and so on and so forth. So I think what Randal's doing here is out of sorts. I think he's stretching it. I think he's on some kind of crusade, but it's getting a little bit too much like maybe like the real crusades, where it starts off with some genuine intent, but it sort of spills over into something that itself needs to be put in check. And I think he's just really stretching it with this criticism of this one letter. So hopefully we responded to that enough. I think so. Anyways, that's it for today. And thanks everybody for listening, and hope to see you next time. All right.